We go from one German country to another, although for national reasons we call this country Austria. This is round 12 of the 2014 FF1M season, and last time out we saw the 7th team win a race this season, in the form of Jensen Button in the FJR. The FJR seem to work on Hockenheim, so we can expect them to be competitive come Monza. And it proved to be a bit of a disaster for Lewis Hamilton and Gajera after suffering an electrical problem immediately after his pit stop. And there's a recap of the standings, and we see Sebastian Vettel holding a 7-point lead over Hamilton, and that was a lucky escape for Vettel as well, because there was an accident at the Jim Clark chicane between Paul Di Resta, Bruno Senna and Fernando Alonso, and this caused Di Resta to triple barrel roll, and then the debris caught out Carlos Sainz and nearly Sebastian Vettel, but luckily for Shake and Bake and team boss Courtney Cass, there was no damage. As for the constructors, we still see Willows leading, and that is by 13 points now from Shake and Bake, although it could have been much more because Rosberg crashed out with just a few laps to go going into the stadium. Here's a look at the Austrian circuit, very simple compared to some others, just 9 corners to think about, and we're expecting 2 or 3 stops, so it appears that most of the field are favouring the softer tyres this time around. Here's a look at the practice times, and we see Lewis Hamilton and Kamui Kobayashi, like they did at Hockenheim, top the session 1 and 2, Grosjean 3rd on the harder tyres, so that's quite impressive, Fernando Alonso 4th, Bottas 5th and Vettel 6th. And nearly more of the same, except Kamui Kobayashi is down in 7th this time, it's Hamilton from Grosjean and Gonzalez, Bottas 4th and Magnussen up in 5th. And just look at some of the other drivers, we've got a flurry of test drivers in amongst the field. So here's a look at the grid, and we've got Romain Grosjean on pole position this time, his 2nd of the season after Silverstone. He's joined by Jean-Eric Vergne. Those two had a battle at Silverstone in terms of pit strategy, but it didn't end well for Vergne. Vergne in fact has suffered a bit of unreliability as of late. Hamilton is 3rd from Rosberg, Alonso 5th, and standout performance for Karun Chandhok in the other Pedersen, he's up in 6th. It's an all FJR row 4, they're looking quite competitive this time around, probably because they're not using the harder tyres. Completing the top 10 are Bruno Senna and the pole sitter from Hockenheim, Adrian Sutil. Championship leader Vettel is down in 11th, but he hasn't been qualifying well of late anyway, but he's been very plucky in the races. All Mitchell row 7 with Buemi ahead of Hulkenberg, Buemi's return proving quite a successful one with 5th in Hockenheim, staying out of the chaos. Not a particularly good one for Carlos Sainz this time around after qualifying on the front row at Hockenheim, he is down in 19th. And as usual, Daniel Ricciardo will start last. So here we go on the grid, and we're waiting for the lights to come on. Pole position on the inside, as this seems to be of norm recently. So 5 lights are on, and we wait for them to go out. They're out, and Romain Grosjean gets away very well, Vergne less so. And is he going to get Lewis Hamilton coming up alongside him? Not quite, because Rosberg is trying to get up alongside the Gajera. You usually see accidents, there's a big accident, a front wing has gone off somebody. I can't quite tell who that is, but it was deep in the midfield, could have been a Horizon. And Vergne is challenging Grosjean going into the Remus curve, but nothing of that yet. Grosjean on the harder tyres, and Vergne on the mediums. So Magnussen up in 6th, where's Jensen Button gone? He started 7th. There he is, but it's a great start from Kevin Magnussen. He's got Bottas coming up alongside him. Bottas has had a great start. Where on earth did he start? He started 12th and he's up into 6th position. Great effort from the GRM, who scored another podium finish at Hockenheim with 2nd. So here is Grosjean going through the 2 left-handers of this circuit and then going into the Jochen Rindt curve. He's got a bit more fuel compared to Jean-Eric Vergne, about 3 more laps. But it's on the edge as to whether he's 2 or 3 stopping. So rounding the last corner and starting the second lap is Grosjean from Vergne. Vergne is the quickest on the track so far, but it's only been the first lap, so we'll cancel that fact out. And let's see, further down the field, we've got red indicators, so some drivers' teammates are due in the pits because of front wing damage, and not one of them is Carlos Sainz, who's coming up alongside Daniel Ricciardo, running a bit wide on the exit of the first corner. I think that's called the Castrol curve back in the day, and it was one of the horizons. It was subtle, and there's a Mitchell as well, which is Sebastian Buemi. That's unfortunate. So points look a bit difficult for the Mitchell driver this time around. So let's see what happens. We're on board with Buemi on the blue-ringed hard tyres. He gets a good launch and he's trying to do something about Sebastian Vettel and gets a bit boxed in. He'll have to lift off a bit. And is he going to... Ooh, that was... Vettel was very, very lucky because Buemi swerved to the left to avoid the concertina of the braking zone. And then Paul Suttil. And there's some bumping. That was between Magnussen and Alonso. So that's where Alonso went, because we didn't see him ahead of Magnussen because Magnussen touched him. So now we're going to complete the second lap, exiting the final corner. There is Romain Grosjean, who currently sits... Where does he sit in the championship? 6th in the championship so far. Won at Silverstone, but suffered an engine failure whilst running in 2nd at Hockenheim. Pretty much exactly the same time as the De Resta, Senna and Alonso conflab into the Jim Clark chicane and into the Remus curve. Is Verne doing anything about it? Well, we'll have a look later, because here is Alonso getting ahead of Kevin Magnussen for 7th position. Willows, I still believe, is the quickest car on the grid, but not so in qualifying, because we're seeing other teams get their act together during qualifying. Rosberg and Alonso were, I say, only 4th and 5th on the grid, but it's not really where they'd want to be. Now, we had a Shake and Bacon and FJR collide here last season. One of them involved Sebastian Vettel, who we're looking at right now, who tagged Hamilton. Now he's got Kevin Magnussen to deal with for 8th position. Magnussen not looking quite as quick in the race, although he did look quite good in qualifying. Qualifying just behind his teammates in 8th position. Button 7th, Magnussen 8th, but now here comes Vettel into the Rindt curve. Not quite. Shake and Bake Megatron needs a bit more power than that to overtake Magnussen. As these two start their 5th lap, and here is Alonso having a look at the inside of Bottas going into Castrol. That's a 6th position gained for Alonso at the expense of Bottas. Now, next target is the splendid Karun Chandhok. Now Vettel has got a tornado chasing him. That's Bruno Senna. It's alongside, but on the wrong side, going into the Remus curve, and Senna backing out of that one. Led for quite a bit of the first part of the race, did Bruno Senna, but then locked up going into the Sud curve and lost a whole heap of positions. Then later on got involved with Alonso and De Resta. Was Alonso's fault, having tagged the back of Senna. Here's Vettel up the inside of Magnussen now into the Castrol curve. He's got him. Now Magnussen has got to be careful because Senna's right behind him. And Senna is, again, trying to choose the outside line. He pulled out a bit earlier this time, and Magnussen's a little bit in trouble unless he can chop back in front, which he does impeccably. Rudely, if you're a Tornado fan. But yes, Senna made that mistake at the Sud curve, and if he hadn't have done that, we could have seen pretty good battle between him and Jenson Button for the lead. As it was, Button won by more than half a minute, which was quite surprising when you look at FJR's form in past races. They weren't very competitive at Silverstone. Neither were they competitive at the beginning of the season. It seems to work on certain circuits and it's hopeless on others. Here in Austria, it seems to work okay. Although Senna's having a look at the inside, and he's got him into the Rindt curve, and that's 9th position for Senna. Now he's going to chase after Vettel. He's got to do something about him because, looking at the fuel gauge, Senna is probably 3 stopping. And just behind Magnussen there is Jenson Button, and there's an X-Lite coming into play as well. I think it must be Kimi Raikkonen. He did qualify ahead of Sergio Perez. We got Paul Di Resta out of the race with a suspension failure. Now we've got Jenson Button having a look now at the inside of Magnussen to the Remus curve, and didn't really commit to that one. Magnussen was far enough ahead to turn in. So need to do a bit better than that, Jenson. Jenson might well be 2 stopping because he has got quite a bit of fuel. Here's Senna, and into the pits comes Senna. So, as I suspected, Senna is 3-stopping. And Chandok's 3-stopping as well, as he's in the pits from a 7th, well, it was actually 5th position, but the pit lane line is before the start-finish straight. So into the pit box comes the Brazilian Bruno Senna. On go a new set of mediums, and on goes the fuel. Could be another 15 laps before he's into the pits again. That's quite a short fill, I have to say. And he's rejoined at worst 18th position. Yep, I suspect it is 18th, maybe 19th, because there's an Andrew F1 coming into play here. And we're having a look at Senna, and his teammate is due in the pits, so I think Vern could well be 3-stopping as well. Into the pits comes Vern, right on cue. Slowing down to 81 kilometres an hour, and into the pit box comes Vern. And the mechanics match the car livery as well, that's nice. And an even shorter fill for Vern, so that could well be lap 32 that we'll be seeing him back in the pits. And a longer stop as well, 7.5 seconds. That's not a good stop actually compared to Senna. So accelerating up to 3rd gear, back down to 1st for this tight right, which marks the pit lane exit. Don't cross the white line. Yep, you're fine. So, Grosjean is still leading now from Lewis Hamilton, and then Nico Rosberg's quite close behind Hamilton. We could be seeing a battle for 2nd place soon, as we have a look at, I think it must be Chandok, challenging Carlos Sainz for 13th position. So, Chandok, having made a pit stop, has rejoined right in the midst of traffic. Now he's in the slipstream of Sainz. Is he going to have a look at the inside? Sainz shutting the door, and Chandok on the soft tyres complies with Sainz's robust defence. Now he's going to have a think about a move into this curve, the Niki Lauda curve, going into the Gerhard Berger curve next. And just in front of them we have got an Excellite. That could be Senna. I think we just saw Paul di Resta's car parked on the right-hand side. So that's where he broke down. Now into the Rindt curve, Sainz hanging on around the outside. Now into the final corner, one of the most difficult ones of the lot. And now Chandok is right in the slipstream, challenging Sainz. Now up the inside into turn 1, I think he's got that one. So we're seeing new tyres working quite powerfully on this circuit. Let's see what Vern can do about Grosjean. Well, at the moment, not a right lot because he's stuck behind 10th place Kamui Kobayashi. But for how much longer? Because he's in the slipstream. Both works engines manufacture engines, so both have access to higher engine modes if they are using it. Vern's still in the slipstream as we approach the Lauda curve. It's a bit of a difficult place to overtake here, and Kobayashi missing the apex by a country mile. I think he was actually in Munich. Now into the Berger curve, and coming out of it. Here is Vern's opportunity going into the Rindt curve. We're seeing quite a bit of overtaking into this corner, but Kobayashi is quite far ahead. He's in the pits this lap, and holding up Vern terribly. That cost Vern a lot of time. And Vettel is in the pits as well, and there's an Excellite in as well, as Chandok has a look at Senna, is that? Or is that Vern? It could well be Vern. So Chandok making a move, and both of these drivers have stopped. So Chandok taking advantage of Vern being held up by Kobayashi, moves up a place. So it's looking good for Chandok. Although he is 34 seconds behind Grosjean, so I wouldn't expect Chandok to challenge for a win, but he's got some serious points in his head. And I think Grosjean, Hamilton, Rosberg, I think the top 7 could well be 2-stopping, as we haven't seen them in the pits, and we're nearly at 1/3 distance. So they consist of Grosjean, Hamilton, both Willows, as Grosjean comes into the pits from the lead, and that temporarily puts Hamilton into the lead, and there's a Willows in the pits as well. It's Nico Rosberg, and you can see by the fuel on the bottom left-hand side that Grosjean is definitely 2-stopping. Should see him back into the pits at around lap 46. So splitting his stints up nice and evenly, and it's a 6.1 second stop, rejoining behind an FJR, which is Button. So for the moment, Button moves up to 4th position as Rosberg exits the pits. He's taken on a little bit more fuel than Grosjean, and he's rejoined in some nice clear track, and crucially ahead of Chandok and Verne, who are still battling away quite aggressively going into the Remus curve. Look at the barge boards on the Tornado. They've got the PlayStation logo and the commands as well, the cross, triangle, circle and square. I like that feature. As into the pits comes Fernando Alonso and Adrian Sutil, the unfortunate Adrian Sutil, after being rear-ended by Sebastian Buemi going into the first corner. So GRM goes through and temporarily assumes a position off of Alonso. I think it must be Bottas. And there's an FJR in the pits as well. Now then, is this going to hold up Fernando Alonso? Not quite. And the FJR Lollipop gets a bit of a fright as Jenson Button goes into his pit box. Now this is Vernon Chandok still battling away as Nico Hulkenberg has suffered a suspension failure and is out of the race. So for the moment Hamilton leads from Bottas. Grosjean is third, having stopped. Magnussen is fourth, but yet to stop. And here comes Bottas. No, it's Rosberg making the move on Magnussen, and Magnussen into the pits subsequently. So both FJRs going quite long compared to some of the other runners. There is Rosberg. He's now in fourth position. Needs to kickstart his championship challenge because he's only had 2 podiums in the past 6 races. 7 races actually, because he had 3 retirements in a row, as into the pits comes Hamilton. Portugal, Monaco and Mexico, and then had a second place at Road America before suffering a transmission failure at Canada, and then scored a 3rd position at Silverstone, partly thanks to Fernando Alonso making a driver error at Copse Corner. Both Willows did finish 3rd and 4th. So there's Hamilton. There's Bottas into the pits as well. So Bottas doesn't get a chance to lead a race, though he's in good contention for some points. So Hamilton not taking on quite as much fuel as Grosjean and in particular Rosberg, so he's going to be fairly quick in this middle stint as he rejoins behind Rosberg. We could be seeing a battle between those two. And Verne is in 4th position. He has got past Chandok now. Verne and Chandok though are on 3-stop strategies, so they need to do something if they're going to get ahead of Hamilton. I doubt it, but it'll be fascinating to see as Felipe Massa comes into the pits, probably the last one to make his first pit stop. Into the Niki Lauda curve goes 3rd place Lewis Hamilton. And Vettel nowhere in the top 8 as he's having a difficult race, and it's a good opportunity for Hamilton to regain some of the lost points. Because goodness knows where he would have finished at Hockenheim. He was just ahead of Vettel before he suffered a race-ending electrical failure immediately after his first pit stop. I counted it was about 3.5 seconds. Here's Magnussen, and he has got an issue. So you can see on the left hand, that is a big issue. The car bouncing all over the place, and that is Magnussen out of the race. He's also having a bit of a lean spell at the moment. He's had a best result of 6th 4 times, although the last 2 races he's had a 10th and a 16th. So what's the diagnosis? It's a puncture, so Pirelli need to get that sorted out. Rosberg and Hamilton, this is going to be a battle for 2nd position now as they approach traffic in the form of Buemi and Sutil. That's ironic. The gap was just 0.3 of a second between Rosberg and Hamilton as they crossed the line to start their 32nd lap. Nowhere near close enough for an overtake going into the Remus curve. Coming out of it, there's a chance going into the Gersa curve with Agip sponsorship. And Verne not too far back from this duo. Although, as I say, he is 3-stopping. Could well be quick come the end of the race with the newer tyres. We'll have to find out. Chandok, meanwhile, is in 5th position ahead of Fernando Alonso. Bruno Senna is 7th ahead of Valtteri Bottas. I believe Chandok is 3-stopping. Senna could be 3-stopping as well, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But it is still Roman Grosjean who holds a 5.8 second lead over Nico Rosberg. What's the gap this time as they cross the line to start lap 33? 6.2, so Grosjean is extending the gap, partly because Rosberg's under pressure from Hamilton into the first corner, not quite. So this battle's definitely on, but here comes Jean-Eric Vergne. Hamilton slowed up by the defensive Rosberg, but choosing the outside, which is not the right line, and as a result, Hamilton stays ahead. Because it's a curved straight, you can defend your position a little bit easier compared to somewhere like Sepang, where the straights are very straight. Now into the Gers curve, and Vergne not close enough this time. Second, third and fourth are all on the yellow ringed medium tyres. Grosjean on the harder tyres, so at least on the Pedersen the harder tyres are working a bit better than the others, but the mediums are not too bad. As we see Suttel and Buemi continue their battle for a much lesser position than this one we're focusing on. And we're about to start lap 34. No sign of Vergne into the pits as of yet. Here is Buemi, and he's in the slipstream of Suttel. Going to the first corner, and there's contact between the two, and off goes Suttel, and spinning goes Buemi. Be careful behind you. Yeah, fine, he's just off the racing line, but Buemi's going to be waiting for a little bit. And nearly making a mess of his recovery, but he's back. And he's got Senna trying to lap him now, which he does successfully. Next one to lap Buemi is Bottas. And he won't do it on the next bunch of straights. Vergne in the pits this lap, just saw the pit indicators. So now, here comes the 3-stop strategy. But first we've got to tackle the Gerhard-Berger curve before a right-hand kink onto a short straight, where we have seen some overtaking. And then we're going to pull to the right a little bit. Slow down quite aggressively for the apex, going into the pit lane. Turn right. And now you're in the pit lane. So through go Chandok and Alonso. That's going to be a battle for 4th position now. Bit of a false battle because Chandok is 3-stopping and Alonso is 2-stopping. As Vergne pulls into his pit box and the mechanics get to work, 5.4 seconds later he's out of the box. So here comes Jenson Button on the 2-stop strategy going past him. So Vergne is going to rejoin in 10th position, as you can see on the top right. Hard right, out of the pit lane, and let's see what you can do on this 3rd set of tyres. Vergne's teammate is during the pits this lap, you can see on the red indicator, so Senna is also 3-stopping, confirmed. Hamilton versus Rosberg once again into the Rindt curve, nowhere near close enough, but just bothering Rosberg a little bit. Out of the final corner, and in the slipstream very firmly. Rosberg weaving a little bit, but Hamilton not having much of that. Out the inside into the first corner, and Hamilton is up into 2nd position. Now, can he do anything about Roman Grosjean? We've got half a race to find out, as Karun Chandok comes into the pits. As does Bruno Senna. So Vergne on the newer tyres has got Jenson Button, as Kobayashi is retired from the race with a transmission failure. That's not going to do Hamilton's self-esteem much good, as Button and Vergne have a bit of a battle going through the first sector. Button is defending, so Button, he wants that 7th position as of this moment. Button has got Sebastian Vettel. Now Vettel's come into play, he's up into 6th position, and I'm sure 2-stopping. And behind there was Chandok. So if Button can hold Vergne up, then Chandok can close up. Although Vergne, I suspect it's going to be when he overtakes Button, rather than if. There's yellow flags, so this must be where Kamui Kobayashi has pulled off. And there's a very brave marshal on the outside. I think he was trying to wave a green flag, but made a bit of an arse of it. Vergne having a look up the inside into Rindt curve, and Button gave him room. That was fair racing. Although he chops him off going into the final corner, so Vergne has got another lap to try and get past Button. Meanwhile, we've got Alonso, who's now quite lonely up in 4th position, and Bottas equally as lonely in 5th. For the moment we are focusing on this battle for 7th position between Button and Verne, and Vettel just edging the gap. Now Verne's got a slightly better run going into the Rinse curve. I think Button's going to have to comply this time. He does indeed. Verne up to 7th, Button in 8th. The points are still possible for Button. Meanwhile, Hamilton is bringing the gap down to Romain Grosjean. It's 5.5 seconds between the two. And seemingly Rosberg doesn't have an answer, because he's now 4.3 seconds behind Hamilton. Verne's next target is Sebastian Vettel, and look how quickly Chandok is catching up to this group as well, as we have a look at Romain Grosjean, who is being caught up by Hamilton definitely. He's got traffic in the form of Felipe Massa, and another horizon. That could well be... It is Suttle, because Di Resta is out of the race. We've seen quite a bit of Suttle, even though he's nowhere near the points. Out the final corner comes Grosjean to start lap 44. The gap was 4.1 seconds as they crossed the second sector point. It's 3.8. Hamilton is gobbling up the gap, and we're definitely going to see a battle for the lead between these two. So the decision to put Hamilton on a slightly lesser fuel load in the middle stint has worked. Well, it's working, because 3.8 seconds is the gap, as Grosjean has now lapped Massa. The end of the first sector comes after the Remus curve, and you can see 4/10 in that first sector, and it is a short lap as well. Another lapping manoeuvre, 3 seconds the gap as they start this lap, lap 45. And Grosjean pulling out a bit of a gap this time around, I think in part thanks to a lot of slipstream from Suttle, as Vettel and Verne go into battle for... No, it's Senna taking 8th position away from Sebastian Vettel. As we revert back to Grosjean, he is due in the pits this lap. This could well be a timely pit stop, because he's being caught up by Hamilton. Pitting first is usually an advantage, because you pull out a bit of a gap with newer tyres. Now, when is Hamilton pitting? That's going to be an interesting point to note, because Hamilton has got the quicker car this time around. And he does need a win, does Hamilton? He hasn't won a race since Mexico. Has had 2 podiums since in Road America and Silverstone. Silverstone was particularly impressive because he was the only driver one stopping. And he did suffer his first retirement last time out in Hockenheim. In terms of reliability as well, Sebastian Vettel has been a very reliable driver, only 1 retirement, and that came in Road America, and that was thanks to Daniel Ricciardo. Into the pits comes Romain Grosjean. Did I see Hamilton pitting at the same time as well? Yes, I did. Lewis Hamilton pitting at exactly the same time. So, it is a straight fight, very even fight on this set of tyres. Hamilton, the first one into the box. Let's look in the distance as Grosjean is jacked up by his mechanics. Now here comes Hamilton, and Grosjean just manages it. 6 seconds stop for the Pedersen driver. Good stop, and it maintains the lead for now. As he rejoins behind Verne, that is 3rd place Verne, Grosjean needs to get ahead pretty quickly. For now, Rosberg leads, and Alonso 2nd. Willow's 1-2, but they have to make a second stop. And of course, this is a battle for position, so that it doesn't need to move out of the way. But for Romain Grosjean's sake, he wish he would. There's Sainz in front of these two. Sainz not in the running for this race. He was very competitive at Hockenheim, but suffered a very unfortunate incident involving the debris of... They actually hit the car of Di Resta. It was Vettel who elbowed a tyre out of the way. Now trying to get up the inside into the Rindt curve comes Grosjean. He's managing it. Has he fully managed it? Not quite. Now this is going to give Hamilton a big advantage. Big momentum coming out of the final corner. It is 0.8 of a second between the two, as we're seeing pit stops. Rosberg was coming into the pits, that's what it was. And you can see Grosjean lapping Daniel Ricciardo, and now it's Hamilton's turn as Sebastian Vettel comes into the pits from 8th position. He'll consider a few points a good result. He'll consider a Hamilton retirement a great result. As we see Chandok lapping an Andrew F1 in the background, could be Kubica, could be Massa. There is a battle for the lead. Kimi Räikkönen comes into the pits. As we focus on Lewis Hamilton for now. Grosjean being held up by Jean-Eric Vergne. He's going to get another opportunity to try and overtake going into the Rindt curve. But customer Mugen engine, and it doesn't have access to the higher engine modes, pulls back before the final corner. Now Grosjean's got another opportunity. Coming down the front straight, not choosing the slipstream at this point. Now he goes into the slipstream. Now up the inside is the first corner. It's tight, but he's managed it. And Hamilton follows through. Now this is Hamilton's opportunity as they go down the back straight going into the Remus curve. He's looking to the left. I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend this, however, as he switches to the inside, but Grosjean has got the better braking and maintains the lead for now. But this battle, you feel, is going to rage on until some sort of resolution can be found. It's going to be an exciting one for the last 20 laps. And it is now a battle for the lead because Alonso has pitted. Now we've got the final 3 stoppers to make. They include Vergne, Chandok and Senna. So now the stage is set between Grosjean and Hamilton. Rosberg has got at least one lap fresher tyres than this battling duo, but he's now 9 seconds behind, so I doubt that Rosberg can do anything about it. So we've got a head-to-head. So as I was saying before that battle really kicked off, the most reliable drivers on the grid have been Vettel and Hamilton, with only 1 retirement each. Sainz also has just the 1 retirement. That came at Road America, and that was a crash as well. Vettel's retirement was also down to a crash caused by his own teammate. And who else has been reliable? Kobayashi has been fairly reliable, 1 retirement, and Massa, 1 retirement. Into the pits comes Karun Chandok and Bruno Senna. Chandok has been fairly reliable, no retirements, but of course he hasn't completed all the races. So that's a bit of a skewed statistic. Least reliable driver on the grid has been Kimi Räikkönen with 6 retirements. So that's not good. And now here comes Jean-Eric Vergne making his final pit stop. Was from 3rd position. So that'll hand 3rd to Rosberg. And I think there he goes. Fernando Alonso will take 4th position off of Vergne as well. So we've got both Willows running 3rd and 4th. That'll be good for their Constructors' Championship, especially as we have got Kamui Kobayashi out of the race, and Shake and Bake not doing very well at the moment. So Vergne rejoins now in 6th position, after a 6.6 second stop, all the 6s. And the gap has just stabilised a little bit between Grosjean and Hamilton. It's now 9/10 of a second. As we have a look at Chandok versus Vergne. Chandok jumped Vergne in the final round of pit stops. So we're going to see Vergne challenging Chandok for 6th position. When is he going to make the overtake? Because Vergne pitted later and is therefore on fresher tyres. Therefore, is a bit quicker. He's going to have a look into the back straight, I think. He's going to switch. Nice. Had to lift off there. Now his next opportunity is going to come into now the first corner with 4 laps to go. And no battle for the lead now. Grosjean is 2.3 seconds ahead of Hamilton, and Vergne is now ahead of Chandok. That is 6th position for the Tornado driver. Both Tornadoes in the points. Vergne 6th and Senna 8th. Now we've got an FJR versus a Shake and Bake for 9th position. Button versus Vettel. Going into the first corner, and Vettel outbreaks Jensen, the German Grand Prix winner, and takes 9th position. Spirited, but a bit irrelevant, unfortunately, because they're both out of the points. So coming out of the Gerhard Berger curve is Roman Grosjean, who has pulled away a little bit from Hamilton. It appears that Hamilton pitting on the same lap as Grosjean has given the advantage to the Pedersen driver. And ever since Silverstone, Pedersen have really come alive, with Grosjean dominating that race. Grosjean in contention for a podium position at Hockenheim before suffering that engine failure. And now he is on his final lap. And just to highlight Pedersen's regain in form, Chandok is in 7th position and is looking good for his first points of the season. Exiting the Remus curve, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more corners to go. As we're coming up to an Exolites, haven't seen much of Sergio Perez in this race, except for a pit indicator. So Exolites having yet another difficult race. They briefly ran second at Hockenheim when the chaos was happening, with Kimi Räikkönen making a late final pit stop and finishing 9th. So we've now only got 2 more corners to go for Roman Grosjean. Here's one of them, the Jochen Rindt curve. There's a marshal waving a flag very early, another one waving a blue flag, because it's the end of the race, and taking his 2nd win of the season is Roman Grosjean. That's a well-deserved win, starting from pole position, and holding off Lewis Hamilton when it mattered. And he set the fastest lap as well, so he does the Grand Slam once again. Hamilton takes 2nd ahead of Nico Rosberg, and Fernando Alonso 4th, both Willows setting the 2nd and 3rd fastest laps of the race. Bottas takes 6th ahead of Jean-Eric Vergne, and there's Chandok getting his first points of the season, with Bruno Senna in 8th position. 6th, 7th and 8th all in 3 stops, and 2 stops it seemed was the correct strategy. Completing the top 10 were Vettel and Button in the end, and they're the 2 X-Lights in 11th and 12th. Sainz not competitive this time around, certainly not compared to Bottas, finishing down in 13th. Now you can see a list of the retirements, and they consist of Kobayashi, Magnussen, Hulkenberg and De Resta. All mechanical, no driver error this time around for any of those drivers. And you can see the poor Adrian Suttle 2 laps down in 18th position. His race just didn't really get going after his rear wing was massacred by Sebastian Buemi. So what does that do for the Drivers' Championship? I suspect Hamilton is going to lead the championship now, because he was only 7 points behind Sebastian Vettel going into this race, and with Vettel not scoring any points, that will move Hamilton up to 73 points, and it's now a 1 point lead over the Shake and Bake Megatron driver. Shake and Bake now suffering from a lack of development, it seems. Rosberg and Alonso hold 3rd and 4th, and they are chipping away at Vettel as well. And because Willows are 3rd and 4th in the Drivers' Championship, they'll be leading the Constructors as well. Of the drivers that have won races as well, Bottas holds 5th, ahead of Roman Grosjean and Jenson Button. So Willows extends their championship lead to 20 points over Gajera, then Shake and Bake 3rd with 78 points, just 4 points behind Gajera, but Gajera did just take that position off of them. GRM are 4th, but they are now becoming under pressure from Pedersen. And thanks to the double points finish, Pedersen moved back ahead of FJR, who sit fairly lonely now, right in the midfield. So we'll be moving from Austria to Hungary next for the Hungarian Grand Prix at the Hungaroring. We shall see you then.